Hi everyone. Hopefully you have completed this side that says, what do you remember learning about Jamestown? And you typed some thoughts in this box about what you remember learning about Jamestown in Virginia Studies. Our driving question for our unit is going to be, how can we as historians explore why so many settlers died at Jamestown? So we're going to keep that in mind throughout this unit. The next thing you needed to do was click on this Jamboard to add your ideas to a sticky note. Don't forget to write your name and do not move other stickies. We've had a little bit of trouble with that in the past, so really make sure you're not moving anybody else's sticky. So you were to click here, go to the Jamboard, add your sticky note, and remember, you're just using the sticky note tool. We're not using the laser pointer or anything else. We don't need to add more pages unless you run out of space here to add your sticky note. And you're thinking about, how can we as historians explore why so many settlers died at Jamestown? So if that's our driving question, what do we need to know before we can answer that question? So here's an example. I wrote my name, Mrs. Pirog. Where did the settlers come from? So I think that that is going to be important to know before we can answer this question. Okay, so let's review some background. Early Jamestown. In May 1607, about 110 Englishmen arrived at the mouth of a great bay on the coast of Virginia. It was to be the first permanent English colony in what is now the United States. The first years of settlement were not easy. You will analyze the following documents to answer the question, why did so many colonists die? So as historians, we're going to be doing something called document-based questioning. We're going to take a look at some different documents and analyze them to help us answer this question. Principal Powhatan and English Settlements, 1607 through 1611. Here's our key down here that shows Powhatan Settlement, English Settlement, English Fort. And hopefully this map looks very familiar. We've talked a lot about these different parts of Virginia, Chesapeake Bay, James River, Jamestown. Most settlements, both Powhatan and English, were close to the water. Consider what advantages or disadvantages there would be when living by a river or a bay. So advantages means what would be something good about living near the water. Disadvantage, what would be something bad? Okay, so let's take a look at some background. In the spring of 1607, 3 English ships carrying more than 100 passengers sailed into the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and worked their way up the James River. Hopes were high, and with good reason. This was to be the first permanent English settlement in the New World. A strong group of English investors stood behind the enterprise. The King of England, James I, had given the colonizers his blessing. Along the river banks, one could see freshwater streams, fair meadows, and goodly tall trees. Ahead lay possible riches, a native population to be taught the ways of Jesus Christ, and maybe even a hidden trade route to China. True, there were many dangers. A Spanish warship or two would not be a surprise. Also, the English had experienced a recent failure on nearby Roanoke Island. In fact, all the Roanoke colonists had mysteriously disappeared. But in 1607, these were acceptable risks. What was probably more important is that the fair meadows and goodly tall trees of the Chesapeake were not empty. Some 15,000 Powhatan Indians lived in the small villages along and around the river. They were loosely ruled by a great chief named Wahunsanakak, also called Chief Powhatan. One of Wahunsanakak's daughters was the fabled Pocahontas, a very real person who would one day marry an Englishman and sail to England. When the English settlers arrived, they built a fort on a place they called James Island. This was to become Jamestown. Of the 110 original settlers, only 40 would be alive at the end of December. The arrival in January of a resupply ship saved the colony from total collapse, but in the next 2 years, hard times continued. Captain John Smith, who had provided much-needed leadership, was sent back to England. Then, in an awful winter of 1609 to 1610, 2/3 of the settlement died. Remarkably, the English kept coming, men, women, and children. The vast majority were young, 17 to 35, and most were poor. They hoped to work off their debt and one day own a piece of land. A few arrived with money, and some would one day find success growing tobacco. But for most, there was no happy ending. By 1611, of the more than 500 settlers who had arrived at Jamestown, 80% were dead. All right, so after you watch this video, you can go back and reread on these slides if you'd like. And then when you're ready, you're going to come down to this side and you're going to do an I used to think, now I think. Okay, so you're going to click here on these Google Slides. The first side has directions. Find your name, complete the box with I used to think, now I think. So what did you used to think about the information that I just read? And what do you think now that we've read this? So you're going to fill out those boxes, and then you're going to respond to someone else's writing by dragging an emoji beside their box. Okay, so everyone's name is in a box here. You're going to find your name. Okay, then you're going to click the box beside your name, type in I used to think, and whatever it is you used to think. Now I think, you're going to fill in what you think now. Okay, then you're going to pick an emoji, so you can either do this heart eyes emoji. This means you really love what someone else said. Or you can do this connection sign if you find someone that wrote something similar to what you said. And you can add an emoji on anybody else's slide, okay? But remember, you're only clicking, so let's say my name is Ty. I'm going to click here and type, double click, type here, and then I'm going to look at other people's responses and see what they said. Okay, let's say I want to make a connection. I read Elizabeth's and I want to make a connection what she said. I'm going to drag this connection sign over to the box. Okay, we are not making these bigger or smaller. Okay, we're not typing in anybody else's box. We're just picking one emoji for one person's response and dragging it to this emoji box. So be very careful that you are not accidentally clicking in anybody else's I used to think or now I think. We need to be very careful about that. Okay, then once you're done with that, you're going to come down and go to reading part 2.